With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
On this episode of Into the Fray, I welcome Barry on with me, and he has several very interesting encounters that I'm very much looking forward to hearing. Barry, welcome on the show.
Hi, Shannon. Good to be here.
Now, Barry, you mentioned in your email you are Shawnee American Indian, and I'm also interested to see how much that might play into your experiences because, of course, I've talked to other folks with that background, and it definitely seems to, right?
Yes, it does. I only mentioned that just as, where I come from. I'm a full-blooded member of the Shawnee tribe of Oklahoma. It does.
So you are living in Oklahoma? Is that where most of these experiences or all of them took place?
Yeah, I've always been in Oklahoma, moved around a few parts. But generally, where we started out at, I guess I'll use Norman, Oklahoma as a reference. If you'll go 13 miles east, there's an area the government gave to the Shawnee Indians, and it's named after the tribe, an old leader called Little Axe. And the Little Axe area was where the tribal members were given an allotment of land by, the whoever was the head of a family or a clan got so many acres to live on. And the thing about Oklahoma, you've heard of the Trail of Tears. Also, there's about 39 tribes that got pushed here. And in that area, I would say there's probably at least 5 or 6 tribes in that area. So it wasn't just the Shawnee that were there, but that's where we started out. We grew up on it was just the first few years of my life, I think 7 years. We had a 5-acre place with it just had a house and 5 acres out in the countryside. And how it started for me, I was 4 years old one night and I heard a symphony of owls outside. And I got up and asked my mother, "What's that?" And she had said, "Those are Indians and they've turned into owls and they're going to hurt us." Well, I just ran back to bed and said, I can't understand. So the next day, that was all I was thinking about. So that's how it all started for me in relation to the visitors. And my father would drive them away with his firearm rifle, and they would go away and come back another day. There was usually one singular one that came regularly, and sometimes he brought 4 or 5 friends, and it would sound like a stereo. And this happened about, I don't know how my time frame is mixed up at that age, but one Sunday morning, my father came in after firing shots, and he said, "I got that one." And I traced it across the fence line into the neighbor's forest, and I lost the blood trail. So about 2 weeks later, we were at the general store. Back in those days, you had a general store that had a little bit of everything. And a family pulled up, and they were telling my mother about an old man who had to be dragged to the hospital Sunday afternoon 2 weeks ago. And when the surgeon came out of the operating room, he came out and asked the family, "Who shot your father?" And they said, "No, he hasn't been hunting in years." And he said he dug a bullet out of his abdomen and he's going to have a colostomy bag rest of his life. And so we put together the pieces as to the owl creature that my father shot was that man. So this went on regularly. It was an occurrence, that type of thing. So one day, my grandmother, who disappeared on my father when he was a baby, and she came back when he was in his 20s and offered him an apprenticeship in her witchcraft art, whatever that was. And he refused it. So she left and she moved in with somebody in the local area. And so as time went on, my father and his brother, Walter, decided to buy about 17 calves and raise them to market size and sell them for a profit. Well, they were housed where we lived because whoever lived there had built a stockade. So when they're babies, you got to keep an eye on them, and that's how they were being raised. And my uncle would come over and criticize my father, who was a workaholic, that, you know, they weren't being fed and watered and properly, but he never would jump the fence and help. So at that time, my father was a hothead. After 2 or 3 times of this, he called somebody to buy the cattle, and a big truck came and herded them all up and they were gone. Well, back in those days, nobody had a phone. So Uncle Walter came over and said, "Where'd the cows go?" And my father had his money in his pocket. He pulled it out of his pocket and shoved it in his front shirt pocket. And he said, "I sold them. There's your share. Bye." Well, Walter just stood there and boiled, and his face and head turned into what my father says, if you've ever seen a bulldog, like a British bulldog with the black hair, he said that's what his head transformed into. So he knew who had the magic stuff. And then that was the real beginning of things that to happen. And so we stayed there for, I think, another couple more years. And the other events that happened was my mother was in the kitchen, and she kept seeing some white figure outside of the house going around and round. And the dog we had was a really good watchdog. It kept chasing it, and it would dive onto it if it could get a hold of it, but it couldn't. And she said it looked like Casper, but without a face. So anyway, the dog chased it into the forest, and that thing was never seen again. So we eventually moved out of the area because it was just too much of an occurrence with those things, critters, I call them. We moved to an area in Oklahoma about 65 miles away. It's the Guthrie area out in the countryside. And they returned, and they came upon us once again. And so we got the symphony of owls hooting and hollering. And my father would occasionally shoot one of them. And I guess they draw real owls. And, you know, it would just lie down and die because it had no powers. And so anyway, that happened. And myself, I thought I could figure it out as whatever you want to call it, using logic. So what I did one night, I put up a piece of cardboard over the house window, and I had a really nice set of binoculars. And I was able to look at all of them. One night we had like 6 visitors. And get this, one of them was a 3-foot owl. And I could not believe the size of that thing. And they were eating bugs off the ground. So I guess I don't know I couldn't tell which ones were natural and which ones weren't. So anyway, my father went out and drove them off. And sometimes when there was a herd of them like that, they would come back hours later. So that was just, I don't know if it was seasonal occurrences or what, but I wandered the forest for miles as a kid. I don't know, I just liked it. I trespassed, and I guess the farmers didn't bug me. I would wave at them and I would keep going by. So I knew the territory. Something else occurred because this wasn't until I was about 12. I would have these invisible, what I would call invisible cryptids. At the time, I didn't know what they were. but they would follow me with heavy footsteps through the forest. And I would deliberately lead them into the clearing spaces. And I would turn rapidly, and there was nobody there. And this always went on and on. There was a pond that I liked sitting by, and I had a friend with me, and we went fishing one day. And somebody was throwing sticks at us from the forest. So we were yelling back and forth at each other, you know, hey man, I'm fishing here, stop it. So we didn't think anything of it. And then like a 4-foot branch came sailing over our head about 30 feet into the water from the forest. And we knew that wasn't us. So we packed up and left. And other times in that forest, I would chase wood knocks, and I could never catch whoever it was doing the wood knocks. But there were times whenever I would hear heavy footsteps circling me in like a half moon pattern to get close to me in the forest. So what I would do, I would, of course, sometimes yell at whoever, whatever it was, and I would lead them into the open field, and I would just wait, and they never followed. So that was whatever it was that we had. I never told anybody about that because back in those days, you report something like that, they'll say you're just imagining things, and or it's somebody out, you know, messing with you in the forest. Having said that about the cryptid things, I was at night when those owls would come out doing their symphony. We had a porch that was on the other side of the house. I would go out and sit on the porch listening, see if I could find a clue. Maybe I was thinking they had a different voice. And about 400 feet away was the neighbor's forest, and I could hear 2 distinct owl calls coming from the forest that sounded like they were about 7 or 8 feet in the air. And they weren't real owls. It was somebody imitating the owls. So that's where I gathered it was those things. For whatever reason, they were mimicking the owls where they were standing. And this had went on more than one night. I just surmised that's what was happening in that respect. But other than that, we did keep we would have somebody beat on the wall, like 3 knocks, and then it would run off, but there would be nobody there. And that too went on and off, but I figured why the cryptid things never went up to the house. See, my father would go out, unload the gun, you know, at any hour of the night. And I figured that they saw that he was that way, and they probably just didn't want to mess with the crazy man at night. Mm-hmm. So they never came around the house. I guess we had one night, I can remember this night. This was like, I remember the night, it was September 11th, 1977. We were all sitting outside, and it was just after sunset, and one of the owls flew into the tree, and my father grabbed his gun and, you know, chased it away. And about 5 minutes later, a UFO appeared. It was triangular, like it came out of a portal, just came out of nowhere. And it hovered at the corner of the yard for about 2 minutes. We just stared at it. It did a slight hum. It had a red and a green light. They were blinking. And then it just flew off. It took it about 3 minutes, and it was among the stars. So, in my opinion, those 2 occurrences were of the same family, because I believe they were trying to intimidate us by creating another belief of something else is here too, and you got to watch out for these things. And that was something to see. But other than that, we continued living there, and I had nobody to tell my stories to, because, you know, at the time, if you told your teacher, which is what my brother did, she calmly said, those are just folktale stories you're being told, and none of that is happening. It's not real. Don't worry about it. So I knew then we had nothing to go on. We had motorcycles. by the time I turned 14, and we used to ride around, and my brother liked going into the forest with his. And on the trails that he would ride, this happened about every 6 months. Something would break open a tree and put it across the trail. Well, he had a friend, his father had a construction company, and he always had real nice chainsaws. So he would just go get a chainsaw because he went riding with him on the same path with a dune buggy. So he would just go get a chainsaw and not think anything of it. And he would just saw it to pieces and move it out of the way. But when I went through there, I stopped and looked at the tree, and they were either pushed over or broken completely over. So I figured who that was. The cryptid things didn't want us back there. But as time went on, I grew to either be fearful of them while I was sleeping in bed or try to ignore them. But it was pretty hard not to. I guess I was about 15 at this point. My father had bought a new shotgun, and he went out to the tree and he nailed the main character, the main owl. And as I ran behind him, but I stayed back about 100 feet for safety. And as the creature was falling to the ground, when you shoot a heavy bird, it falls like a rock, and about 100 plus feathers just scattered through the air. So I knew it was a direct hit. And I thought, as it was falling, good, I finally get to see this whole story end right here. Well, the thing bounced twice and then it flew off. My father had already moved up his position and was still firing upon it, and it escaped just like that. And so that was my oh crap moment in my life, whenever you see something and you can't believe it. But he was unfazed. He just went in, put the gun away, went back to bed like it was an everyday event. Myself, I couldn't sleep. That really shook me up. So it takes a different something or another to stop those things. Anyway, so I moved out of the house when I was 16, and in my work life, I ran across a man named George who grew up in Nigeria, out in the sticks, and they were in a village, and they were so poor, all they could eat was fried grasshoppers, fried rats when they could get a hold of them. I was telling him my story, and he said, we have similar in Nigeria. He was telling me that he had a friend who imagined when he was sleeping at night with his windows open, that a black bird would walk on his chest, and then it would fly away. And the next day he was just sapped of all those energies. Well, George said to him, put a basket by your bed and capture this creature, and then, break its leg or something. And then, so he captured it, but he panicked, and he grabbed the bird by its legs and just whacked it on the board of his bed a few times. And the bird flobbled out. He let it go and it flobbled out the window. And then the next day, they went looking for somebody who could be hurt. And it turned out that a teacher, a headmaster, was out that day. And George knew him well enough to knock on his door. So he knocked on his door and said, how have you been today? And he had his head wrapped up. He said, George, my head has just been hurting me all day long. I'm going back to bed. So that kind of confirmed to me that, a continent away, it's still going, stuff like that still goes on. And so we were able to trade stories. And he told me something about they have a monkey over there that they call the green monkey. And they tell their women and girls when they're on their period not to step out into the forest or out into the yard, because the green monkey will smell that and attack them sexually. So I did not know that either, but that might be something I guess all the female Sasquatchers might watch out for in that event. But Anyway,
No, we you know what, Barry, we have heard that. Some people think that if you take a female out, that's, your first initial check mark. If she happens to be that time, that's a second check mark. And people have said to watch out for something like that. So that does track.
wow. Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. Very interesting. And I mean, this whole bird, I mean, the theme of the birds through this whole thing is fascinating to me, right? I mean, for so essentially these owls, when they would come in, because of the fact that the primary animal that seemed to be the person shifting into would be the owl, these were fair game no matter what, right?
Yes.
Were there stories or encounters of these people that can shapeshifting into other animals?
Yeah. I had a cousin who was 2 years younger than me, and we were over there visiting my aunt in the Little Axe area. And his mother told the story because he would always start crying when he would tell it. He was in the yard. No, he was down the road. Back in those days, you could run down the country roads and play. And he played until dark time, and he saw his uncle's pickup truck parked on the side of the road. So he thought, oh, he must be down there doing something. So he runs down there and he finds a clear spot where he thought somebody might be in the side of the road. And it was the uncle. And he took his clothes off and he had a series of stones that he touched with his foot. He turned into a household dog. Now, the cousin immediately ran into the house crying because of what he saw. But yes, see, that just a typical household dog. He said it wasn't a wolf, it wasn't a giant anything. He said you would just think it's somebody's dog on the porch.
I could see
So yes,
where that would traumatize him. Holy smokes. I mean, especially someone that you know. And then he had to see the uncle again at some point, right?
yeah, we were all. I tell you what, I can describe the situation. The uncle came over and ate dinner with us one time, and we were all on pins and needles as to not speak of such things. Period. So it was kind of an eerie silence. And that's the way everybody treated him. They treated him with respect, but what do you say to that guy? Oh, and by the way, his personality was jovial. He liked to joke. So that, you would never know that he was that by talking to him because he was always ready to joke and try to make a laugh with you. So strange.
Maybe that's part of the ruse, right? So, Barry, this is very much a from the movies type of a thing, but I just wanted your opinion on this because, like, one of my favorite movies is The Wolfman with Anthony Hopkins and Benicio del Toro, right? They're actually a family of werewolves that can shapeshift, right? They're people to werewolves, to dogman. When after they shapeshift into these things, they, at least in the beginning, they don't recall what they did while they were shifted, essentially. Is so that doesn't seem to be the case with what you guys had going on. It seems like if you had talked to that man that got shot in the stomach by your father, it seems like he would have remembered why he got shot because he was out doing his dark stuff, and essentially your father, he was fair game. He gave him what he deserved because he was doing this dark. I mean, I don't know. Is the term magic? I don't know. It's a gift, a magic. I don't know. But would he remember that?
Yes, yes. Here's another side to this. I had bought this, well, a toy ball that I left out in the yard one night, and it was dark, and I forgot I left the ball out there, and I didn't want the creatures to get it. So I went running out there, and the owl came flying in, and he swooped down about 10 feet above me rather, and we locked eyes. And he was going to this tree that he always sat in. So there's also rules to this game in that the person they set out to get with their magic, that's who they're stuck with unless you attack them. So since I wasn't that party, all he could do is lock eyes with me.
Oh, interesting.
And I ran back inside the house.
Well, and Also that's encounter with, you said the head honcho owl, where you thought, oh, finally it's going to be over. My dad got him. He shot him. And because I can tell you, when birds have a big issue, or if it's something that'll end everything, they do eject a bunch of feathers. That's what they do. So I can see where if you see hundreds of feathers, you're like, oh yeah, game on, dad got him. But he didn't. He flew right off. I mean, your poor dad, I bet he was like, well, thought I had that guy. So in that case, because the other man, he actually had to go to the hospital. He had lifelong affliction now because of what he did, and then he ended up getting shot in the stomach. What about that owl? Did it was so powerful that the bullet didn't really truly penetrate, so that person will not have any lasting effects?
Okay, according to my father, yes, they do get hurt, but they use their magics when they get back home to heal themselves.
So maybe that first man just wasn't powerful enough to do so. Maybe he was a fledgling shapeshifter, essentially.
Right, or his magic didn't work.
Wow.
That's the other possibility.
So that the owl that you say was the head honcho, is that one that was 3 feet tall that you mentioned?
No.
Oh my
This one
God.
was about 10 or 11 pounds, and it was just a regular barn owl.
Okay.
That's what they were. We have in this Oklahoma region. That 3-foot owl was a horned owl, and it was eating bugs. And I was just amazed because, see, I had planted a tree and I knew how tall the tree was. I planted in the yard and it walked right by it. So I knew how tall that thing was.
Wow. So what percentage, and not that you're probably going to know, but what percentage of the owls that came in were actually owls? And then if it's a mix of them, do the normal owls, can they tell that the one next to them is not quite really an owl?
Yes, but yes and no. I think it fools them enough by the hooting and they look at them visually and they think, well, that's an owl, definitely. And so they join in the hooting, like you'll have a flock of birds and you don't know which one's making the noise because so many of them are doing it. It's the same way.
Well, and then you have, okay, so sorry, this is fascinating. That's why I have a million questions. So the owls that are shapeshifted, now those don't sound like a Bigfoot mimicking an owl. Those actually, when they are owls in that state, will sound exactly like a regular owl, right?
Yes, they have the characteristics and attributes of that creature.
And then you had the whole Bigfoot situation of them trying to mimic owls from the woods, right?
Right. And I felt like I knew them because I had talked to them. And, when I was alone in the forest and they never answered, they never showed themselves. So, yeah.
When your father shot, I guess, both owls, if it laid there long enough, it would have turned back into the person. Did your dad ever say, oh, I know who that, the main guy is, I'm going to get him? Was there ever any conjecture about, who the shapeshifters were?
Yes. I'm not going to mention any tribes.
Right.
Because in that area, there was just several tribes. And we heard at that time in Little Axe that there were allegedly, that these certain men of different tribes were those things. And my father was a hothead. I guess he had gotten into hard arguments with all of them, and they couldn't leave it alone. They couldn't drop it. So we suspect that's who it was.
So they would essentially shift and then come in just to kind of terrorize, or what was their end game?
I think of the storybook Covens, how they help each other.
Okay.
How they sit around and do what they do. Then they go out and try to cause their damage to that person.
I mean, at least they couldn't mess with you too much. Like you said, there was a boundary there.
Yeah, if you weren't the named party, You couldn't be bothered. I have a story about my brother who joined the party, which he shouldn't have. That's part of this story.
Yeah, go ahead if you want to share that one.
Okay, this was years towards the last few months of my father's life, I think a couple of months. They had moved away to the outskirts of Oklahoma City, which it was still part country. He was drinking. He was living with my father in a mobile home, and my father was late coming home from work as usual, and my brother had been drinking, sitting outside, and they had found them, and they were in the trees in the forest that was like 400 feet away or 500, and they started their song, and he grabbed the rifle and just unloaded. Okay, that was his invitation. So he said about a week later, he started having heartburn in his chest every night. And he didn't put the pieces together, but he would come out of the bedroom and go lay on the couch and sleep. So he decided, well, I'm going to the doctor this week and see what needs to be done. He didn't tell anybody. Well, my father, in his last 7 years, had become a true Christian, and he had perceptions that I never thought somebody could have. But he came home one night and told my brother, he said, Saturday, we're going to get you a new mattress. And he said, okay, sure. And they got him a new mattress Saturday in the day and threw the other one in the trash. And the problems went away. So they done something to the mattress. But he never told my father. My father just had perceptions of things. And that's an example of that.
Now, Barry, could you or anyone in your family choose to shapeshift or learn to shapeshift?
You have to have a teacher. You have to have a teacher. Let me back up to my grandmother's passing. She's the one that offered it to my father, and he rejected it. Anyway, back in those days, women took care of things like when somebody passed, they took care of the belongings, putting them away. And they unraveled in the room that she was staying what looked like in a rag, a cloth rag, was a piece of meat. And they looked at it, and I thought, what is that thing? And it moved by itself. That was one of her devices. And the story legend is it was a piece of some animal or beast that they empowered as a tool to do their stuff. And anyway, so the girls, they were young women, they ran out of the room screaming. So she had tools in her stuff.
So why would your father turn her down? I mean, morally, I would assume that's why, but I mean, it would sound like there might be some kind of a draw to have that ability.
Well, see, he grew up in that area, Little Axe area, and his father had the same problem, same visitors, and he knew they were no good. So that's why it was a moral decision.
And those visitors for him were also owls?
Yes.
Because I'm assuming if you shapeshift, you take on whatever physical attributes the actual animal would have. So you'd have fantastic night vision. You could fly, which who doesn't want to fly, right? So an owl just seems like a perfect cover. And you can come in at night and still see very, very well.
Yeah, and here's the funny quirk. Since we were 65 miles away from where they were, see, all these men had the typical labor jobs, so you had to be on time every morning.
Mm-hmm.
They would do their singing up until 6 a.m., so there's no way you could get 65 miles away and still get to your job at 7 a.m. It wasn't possible without a portal. And that's what they used to cut the distance down into seconds. We never saw it, but it's the only case that it could be.
Did your dad openly talk about all of these things with you?
No, he was a quiet man to us children. I just overheard all this when he talked to my mother.
And then so your mom was probably the same way, right? It wasn't really something to discuss with the kiddos.
Yeah, it was that they were that way about it. And they did hire the services of, quote, good witches. And they were American Indians, and they would come out and it would clear things up for about a week, and then it would start back over. So they were basically just a temporary fix that wasn't a cure.
Do you recall the kinds of things that they might do to keep things away for a week?
Yeah, one of them had a leaf in her hand, and she would walk up and shake everybody's hand, walk the property, chant a song. Sometimes it would work, and Walter would have to obey by the bylaws. And one of the little bylaws was if you'd done something to somebody, you had to come pick it up by the third day. And by the second day, he drove up in his pickup truck. So that's something like that.
Barry, that triangle UFO that came in, how large would you say that was?
Gosh, I would have to say it'd probably be about 50 by 80 feet.
And you said you heard humming, and it did have a couple of lights.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
and
a red and a green light.
And that was the only UFO you guys ever saw?
Well, I believe those things mark you. The ones who are, I don't know what the word is, bad. The bad UFOs mark you, because when I was in my 20s, I had a job where I traveled in a company van, and I would be out late, where the skies are clear and beautiful. And I would stop and look at the stars sometimes, and I would see a dancing UFO up there with a red and green light, just dancing in circles, or a figure eight. And one time I was at a convenience store. I almost stopped somebody and say, would you look up at that and see what you see? I figured it was just something they did for me, but this went on for years.
I mean, does that mean that at any point in your life, did you ever have any classic, I saw a gray alien in my room and I floated through a wall? Was there anything like that, even like in a dream that you thought was, maybe it was a dream or maybe it wasn't? Anything like that?
No, here's a funny thing that me and my brother and sister made. We made a pact when we were small children. We were sitting out in the forest, walking around out in the forest, and we all agreed that if any animal or weird creature, ghost, or anything else spoke to us, don't have a conversation with it. Just ignore it and give it no power, and keep going about your way, because it's one of those creatures. So that was kind of strange for kids to make that kind of decision. But I did speak out loud to that thing. In the sky, I said, I know you're there, and you keep doing it just for me. I said, I know who you are, and I think I know where you come from, and I don't want nothing to do with you. And it stopped. So there you go.
You know what's funny about that side of the UFO subject is that it does tie in heavily to consciousness and people being able to speak in their minds, even just in their minds, to something that's thousands and thousands of feet in the sky. How in the world would they be able to hear you? Well, because of other things that we don't understand. And I've heard that time and time again, that people somehow know that they can just talk to these things and they can say either, oh, see you tomorrow night at 9, or I don't want to see you again.
Yes, I did that when I was 10 years old in the forest, because I was so confused about life, who was good and who was the most powerful. And I spoke to the air. I said, I know you creatures are there. I can't see you, but don't come around me and don't ever talk to me. I said, I know what you are. And that was it.
If your father had accepted the offer from your grandmother and then he had these gifts, would that have meant that you would have never have had the owls coming in? Maybe you would have learned to have shapeshifted. Would your life have been completely different in a lot of ways if he had accepted that?
Yes, it would have. We never went around that man's children. He had a couple of kids, boys and girls, and we never went around them. But we think that his wife ignored the whole events of him, disappearing at night. We think she just ducked her head and ignored it.
So, I mean, isn't that funny? Well, it's not funny, but it's funny because, for most women, your man goes out all night, you think he's with another woman. But in places like this, it's probably not. It could be that, or it could be he's turning into a friggin' owl and going and harassing people. So that's incredible.
Yes, I get this from people that they don't know any of this goes on. And I consider Oklahoma, true blue Indian country because there at one time there was just so many,
Yeah.
but they don't talk about it outside of their sect or groupings because they think the spirits will come upon them that day.
Barry, what about Dogman? We just talked so much about shapeshifting. Are there any beliefs amongst anybody that any of those could be people that have shapeshifted?
Well, they never talked of that. They only said that they could become, what equates to what you see in the zoo or a domestic animal. That's really all they ever said. They didn't talk about a mixed creatures.
Okay. Yeah, that would be so interesting to have somebody see one of those things and see what they thought, because of the fact that they have all these gifts and they can turn into these things and they go, oh, well, what the heck is that thing, I mean, I guess when you start talking about portals and, I mean, okay, so that actually, let me just back up. What are your thoughts on Dogman then?
I believe it's real because I listen to programs like yours and others. And see, if you look back, like take, for example, Lewis and Clark have something that they mention about those cryptids. Way back when, like, for example, when people went out and tried to collect historic Indian stories, they had nothing to lose by telling their stories. And they have stories of those creatures. And that's why I believe they're real.
So, Barry, when your father passed, did the not owls go away?
Yes, yes. It was concluded at that time, and they didn't bother my brother because he stayed in the same place, living there.
But even to this day, I mean, surely if you see an owl ever, do you ever wonder, or do you know that's just an owl?
Yes, in 1995, I was on my long drives, and one of them flew up. I was at a stop sign, and it flew up on the stop sign and stared at me. I freaked out. So, yes.
I can imagine. What kind of an owl is that? Could you tell?
Typical what I call a barn owl. That's a small owl that doesn't have huge horns. The feather horns.
So, do you know what kinds of things your grandmother was capable of?
No, she left when my father was a baby, so it was just my 5 kids and the father there in a 2-bedroom house out in the sticks.
Yeah, I bet she's got some stories. Not that she would share, but that's wow. Yeah. Yeah, I bet when you did see that owl, you're like, oh no, 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 no.
Right, not my turn.
Not not today. Well, Barry, did you have any other experiences you wanted to share?
Yeah. When my father died in that Little Axe area, there was a preacher. He called his church that he built the Baptist Mission, and he stayed there, into his old age. And so after the funeral, I asked him, I said, how did you survive all these years? And he said, well, yes, I've had different tribal members come up and said they were going to cause harm to me with their magics. And he said they would either walk up or drive up in their car to the church here and make that threat and then leave. I said, so what did you do? He said, I blessed the property regularly all the way around. And I said, so what happened? He said, I never had an issue, never had any visitors. So in that sense, so see, something does work.
So, for the most part, in areas like that, quote unquote conventional religion was really not welcome.
Yeah, in that culture, it was a small percentage that went to his church, That's why he called it a missionary. It wasn't welcome with the American Indian beliefs in that area for the most part.
Do you know what denomination that would it? I mean, would it be Christian, just general Christianity that was
His was
going on?
Baptist.
Okay. So anybody that went there, didn't they get on a short list of people that could, do them harm or harass them?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you ever hear of anything happening to those attendees of that church?
Well, my aunt had visitors regularly, but she didn't have a man in the house, so nobody could drive the creatures away. And if you don't do anything about it, they'll just I call it they'll come to your place and have church is what they'll do.
Yeah. So visitors, as far as what you guys would have as well, is like knocking on the walls, outdoors, things like that.
Uh-huh. And regular domestic animals wandering around through your yard. And
Mm.
sometimes your dog might chase it away and it might just sit on the porch. So it's just kind of strange how that worked.
So dogs that were probably not dogs, at least not full time.
Yeah, we had dogs that would wander up, and it was looked like if you've ever seen a dog whose hair had never been combed, I always thought that was weird because they would come up like that, and I thought, wow, and it would walk back off. So yeah.
Yeah, you'd think if you were a dog only part of the time, when you shifted into a dog, you could at least look presentable, right? That is interesting. Maybe just the logistics of the shifting, just they were just knotted and looking like that. And I mean, who knows what goes on in these types of portals, right? Did they always have to travel through the portals, do you think? Was that part of the shape
To
shifting?
to transfer, well, the shape shifting was just a morph like you
Okay.
see in the science fiction movies.
Mm-hmm.
It was an actual morphine.
And then the portals was literally just travel. So that, like you said, they could
That's
get to their 9 to 5 and not be late.
exactly. See, I approach this trying to be logically. So that's how I figured this stuff out.
Have you ever wanted to see something shift?
No, when I was young, I thought it might be cool, but as I grow older and listen to other people's stories, I'll pass.
I don't blame you. But I bet when your father shot that owl that he thought was the head honcho and it bounced twice, I bet both of you thought, oh, we're about to see who this is.
Yes,
Is part of you relieved that it flew off?
yes. Well, see, the sheriffs who have a high ethnic groups in their area, they know the beliefs of the area. So they would probably just file it away and not make a big deal of it.
Mm.
Treat it like it's a self-defense
Mm-hmm.
type of situation because you can't drag that stuff into court. It won't, nothing will stand up on either side if you say, this is the reason I did this, and
Right.
so on and so forth. So, yeah.
And I could see where the curiosity would be there, but then again, yeah, do you really want to see this person lying there not shifted and now full of holes, and see, and even though that would have been the head honcho, you kind of did say that would have been the end of it, but would it really have? Or would there have been some kind of retaliation? Or is that fair, like I said in the beginning, like fair game? Like, hey, he was there, he got shot.
I don't know that answer because we never got that side of things.
Right.
And the other families in that area, they wouldn't talk about it. So it's really just a mum thing with them. Even now, I still go back in that area a couple times a year for work on people's houses. I'm out before sunset, but it's been, there's a lot of Caucasian people that live in the area. And so I don't know what goes on there anymore.
Like maybe they can't execute some of their practices as easily anymore.
Yeah, and also it's been disseminated within the people because if they intermarry, they don't know how to cope with it. It's new to them and their family because their family never had that before they came to that area.
And I suppose once you dilute things, you can't pass things down quite so easily that maybe the gift gets diluted.
Yes, and it might go, instead of staying in that county, it may go to a relative, 2 counties over. You see?
That's fascinating. So, Barry, you said that you sometimes go in there still for work and you normally leave before sunset, and that might just be the nature of your work. You need some daylight. Or is it also you don't really want to be in there after dark because you've seen enough?
I really don't want to be in there at night
Yeah.
because if I see things flying, I'll immediately draw back to that.
Yeah, I bet. Well, anything else?
Let's see here. That's about to the extent of those events. I haven't had any events where I live, but then again, I don't live in those areas anymore.
I mean, do you feel like no matter where you go, how old you get, how long you've been away, don't you feel like if you moved back there that things would kick up?
Yes, I do.
That's certainly what it seems like, doesn't it? I mean, I don't think it would take very long even. And you would just have like binoculars on you from not very good meaning people and things.
That is correct. And nowadays, I mean, depending on where you live, if you're just out target practicing, they'll call the sheriff on you to come out or to come out and look at you. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, those days are gone, right? Like those days your dad would just come out ablazing. Can't do that anymore.
That is correct.
Well, Barry, thank you so much for coming on to share these encounters with me. I loved this.
All right. Well, thanks for letting me share.